when I hear a very wonderful introduction like that, and I'm told and reminded of the different jobs I've done in the different places, I start to feel very old. So I wanted to tell you, I didn't stay in any of those places very long. I've got to the stage now where I don't just lie about my own age and my children's age, I also lie about my grandchildren's age. So that's the way things go. Well, when I arrived here last night, I was told that it was part of this great celebration of this beautiful university. I'm so impressed with the resources and the atmosphere in the university. And somebody said to me over a very nice dinner last night, it's going to be like a giant birthday party, and you're the birthday cake. You know? And I had this vision of 125 candles on my head, you know. Anyway, it is delightful to be here and to share some ideas with you, which I hope are relevant to all of your work, whether you are working in schools or in the university. Many of you I know are students on the way into working into the education system. At Manchester, I'm part of a group of researchers whose interest is in this idea of equity. And I think I need to start by explaining what's in my mind when I say equity. I take equity to be about inclusion, including every child, every young person into the school. But I also want to go beyond inclusion and talk about fairness, because we could include somebody and not treat them fairly. So the vision I have, and what's informing my work and my colleagues, is how do we develop schools and then school systems which are equitable, inclusive and fair. Inevitably, a lot of my work is with individual schools and with networks of schools, but what I've gone on to be really preoccupied with in the last few years is how do we take whole systems forward? Whether that's systems at the local level, in Bilbao or in the Basque region, or at the national level. But it seems to me that we will only make so much progress if we just concentrate on individual schools. That if we can actually coordinate our efforts within individual schools in relation to other schools and the whole system, then maybe we can make more progress. So I'm going to talk about developments in my own country. And in saying that, I need to give you a health warning. I need to give you a health warning. Education, and schools in particular, are very much tied in with local history and local culture. And although schools look very similar wherever you go in the world, as soon as you start to look more closely, and as soon as you start to talk to teachers, to children, to parents, you realize that systems work very differently. So therefore, it's dangerous to think you can take ideas from one place, put them on an aeroplane, and take them to another place. And so I'm very concerned to say to you, what I'm talking about are experiences in England from which I will try to draw some lessons, but these, to mix my metaphor, these are not a recipe. They're not a recipe. You can't just say, this worked in England, therefore we'll use it in Spain. So we see this massive push to improve the education system. Much of that has been associated with increasing centralization. The introduction way back in 1988 of a centralized national curriculum. What followed was the introduction of national testing systems. We boast that our English children are probably the most tested children in the world, right? So we have testing and examinations, a national inspection system so that schools are regularly inspected, and the reports from those inspections are published regularly in the newspaper and in the media, all based on the assumption held by different political parties that the way to improve standards is to increase competition in the system and to give parents more choice, right? Increasing competition, parents having choice, and in order to enable them to have choice, they have to have information. They have to know how well the school is performing, hence the need for testing. I say all of that because I feel fairly confident that here in Spain you're going to see more of the same in the near future, because Spanish politicians are very aware that on the international comparisons that politicians are very preoccupied with these days, Spain does relatively poorly. And so they will look to other countries and they will adopt similar patterns. So I warn you that that is coming. Increasing centralization, competition and choice. And I say again, it has raised standards. It has raised, in a sense, the minimum standards across the system. Now, my interest, of course, is not just in raising standards, although I'm all for that. My interest is in making sure that in raising standards, we don't leave some children behind. The most vulnerable children, whoever they might be. That is the equity agenda, making sure that everybody is being reached in terms of our efforts to improve the system in that respect. And with my colleagues in the University of Manchester, we have worked over the last 15 years or so in the system, as the Dean has said, working collaboratively with schools and communities to try to make sense of what's been happening in the system and to see if we can contribute to the strengthening the system around the theme of equity. What I'm looking at through this analysis is what can we learn from the English education system that points to the actions that need to be taken? Well, the steps create the sense of the ingredients that I think need to be considered. Our analysis suggests that the system in England still has more capacity to improve itself than is actually being used. And what I often say when I'm talking to head teachers in England, I always say to them, your school has more expertise than it's actually using. There's more expertise there in your school than you are using at the moment. And if you want to improve your school, which I'm sure you do, you have to make better use of the expertise that's there. So the implication of that is improving a school, especially in relation to this idea of equity, inclusion and fairness, is about looking inwards, making better use of the experiences, the expertise, and the creativity that's within the school. Not looking elsewhere for ideas, but first of all, making sure you're using the resources, the human resources that's there within your school. Our recommendation, based on all of that, points to certain things that need to go on to stimulate creativity. First of all, it points to the need for greater collaboration within the system. What we know about organizations of any kind, in business, in society, in universities, and in schools, is that if people are left on their own, they run out of resources in terms of what they might try. If people come together in teams, in groups, in networks, then of course they learn from one another and they challenge one another and they stimulate one another. And what I've learned is the schools that are most effective and therefore most inclusive are schools that are characterized by collaboration and teamwork. Teachers working together, children working together, learning from each other, schools working with parents and the wider community. A process of collaboration which stimulates innovation. And what we've also learned, certainly in my country over the last few years, is that can be extended beyond the school gate, not just to the families and the community, but also to other schools. You can create networks of schools where schools learn from one another, a concept that I'll come back to in a few minutes' time. But collaboration of itself even though it is essential, is not sufficient. What we know is that you can collaborate with people to stay the same. You can collude with other people to say, there's no more we can do. There's nothing else we can do. There's nothing we can do with these children. They're too difficult. There's nothing we can do with these resources. We haven't got enough resources. There's nothing we can do with this government policy, which is a barrier. So you can collude with one another to stay the same. So effective collaboration within a school and beyond a school has to have some other ingredient. And the ingredient I'm suggesting from our work is the ingredient is that of evidence. You have to have evidence that brings a critical edge to the collaboration so that it matures and so that people are challenged to think in new ways. And when I look at schools that make progress in using the expertise that's there to reach out more effectively to all of the children, built into the school always are opportunities for teachers to see one another working so they can share ideas, and opportunities for children to tell us what it's like to be a learner. The voice of the children creates a critical edge in that respect, really. And so those of you who are working in schools, what I would say to you is, if your colleagues do not have chance to see one another teaching and talk about their shared experience, if you do not have effective strategies for listening to the voice of children, then you have a very limited view of what it's like to be a learner in your school. What the pattern is clear, that those efforts to improve the system do not work unless they include efforts to change the experience of children in the family and in the community. We have to link the improvement of the school to the improvement of social conditions. We have to look at housing, we have to look at transport, we have to look at career opportunities in order that we create pathways for the most vulnerable groups within the school in that respect. So I'm adding an extra responsibility to the school. It's not just doing a good job in the classrooms, it's connecting that to developments in the wider community. But the central idea, and which is really central to everything I'm suggesting that you think about here in the Basque region, the central idea that I got from London was you have to analyse the context in order to determine where the biggest issues are that need to be addressed. And you also have to analyse the context to find the strengths. In other words, the resources that can be used to address the issues, and especially the human resources. Now that fits with everything I've said, that when you want to move something forward, whether it's a classroom or a school district or a country, you have to carry out a situational analysis. You cannot presume that an idea from another place will never necessarily fit your place. The strategy is one of creating pathways in order that we can move best practice and expertise and knowledge around the system. So it's a process of finding ways of moving knowledge around. There was a school in the city of Manchester, a big primary school, that serves an area where almost all the families are originally from Pakistan. So all the families are of the Muslim faith, a big school. One of my colleagues partnered it with another very big primary school in another part of Greater Manchester, Bury, for those who know the area, that was a school, a state school for children from the Jewish Orthodox religion. So we had a Jewish Orthodox school supporting a school that was predominantly Muslim. The impact of the partnership was fantastic. not just in terms of improving the learning of the children, but also in terms of social cohesion, because the teachers in both schools so much enjoyed learning from one another. I would defend it as a strategy for breaking down barriers in terms of social cohesion. But in another sense, what I've described for you this evening is something which is actually, in one particular sense, simple. To move an education system forward, to make it both excellent and equitable, inclusive and fair, you need the collective will of people to make it happen. Next slide. That's what makes the difference, the collective will to make it happen. And that's the message I would like to leave you with. I would welcome your questions and your comments. Thank you very much.